In the shadowed hollows of the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist clung to the pines like forgotten secrets and the wind carried echoes of long-buried cries, there lived a family bound not just by blood, but by a tangled web of unions that defied the natural order. The old house squatted at the end of a rutted dirt road, its weathered boards groaning under the weight of generations, windows like hollow eyes staring out into the encroaching dusk. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something sweeter, more insidious, decay masked by the faint perfume of wildflowers pressed between yellowed pages of a family Bible. Elias Whitaker, the stooped patriarch with eyes as pale as moonlit fog, ruled over his domain with a quiet authority that brooked no questions. His wives, 3 sisters with faces that mirrored each other in eerie symmetry, moved about the dim rooms like ghosts, their laughter a brittle thing that shattered against the silence. Children, or were they grandchildren, scurried in the corners, their features softened into unnatural sameness, whispers of ailments that twisted limbs and minds alike. No outsider had ventured here in years, not since the last curious soul vanished into the hills, leaving only rumors that slithered through the nearby town like serpents. But on this chill autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged ridge and shadows lengthened like grasping fingers, a stranger's footsteps crunched on the gravel path, drawn by tales of the most entangled lineage in American history, unaware that some doors, once opened, sealed shut behind you forever. In the dim back room of the county archives, tucked between dusty tax ledgers and crumbling marriage bonds from the 1890s, Dr. Mara Ellison first felt the chill that would not leave her for months. She had come to this forgotten corner of West Virginia on a grant that sounded harmless enough, mapping migration patterns of post-Civil War Scotch-Irish settlers through church records and courthouse filings. Most days were spent tracing ordinary lives, farmers who moved one ridge over, daughters who married the boy next hollow, sons lost to tuberculosis or the coal mines. Then, on a rain-lashed Thursday when the power flickered and the fluorescent lights hummed like dying insects, she opened a ledger no one had touched since 1932. The entries began normally enough: Whitaker, Elias B. 1867 M. Mary Catherine softly 1889. Then, in the same spidery clerk's hand, Whitaker, Elias M. Martha Jane softly 1891, and again, Whitaker, Elias M. Lucinda softly 1894. 3 marriages, 3 sisters, all dutifully recorded as if the clerk himself could not quite believe what he was writing yet refused to leave it out. Beside the final entry someone had scrawled in faded brown ink, almost certainly not the clerk's, the words "God keep the children." Mara's pulse quickened. She knew multiple marriages were not unheard of when death parted couples young, but these dates overlapped. No death records accompanied the first 2 wives. All 3 sisters were listed as living when the 3rd ceremony took place. She cross-referenced census pages until her eyes burned. The 1900 schedule showed Elias, 33, head of household, with wives Mary, 29, Martha, 27, and Lucinda, 24, all marked wife, and 8 children aged 1 month to 10 years, every last one carrying the surname Whitaker. The enumerator had written "see remarks" in the margin, but the remarks page was torn out. By 1910 the household had swollen to 23 souls, the relationships column a nightmare of abbreviations: son, daughter, wife, stepdaughter, niece, all circling back to the same handful of surnames: Whitaker, softly, Whitaker again. Birthplaces were left blank or simply read home. Mara sat back in the creaking chair, the damp smell of old paper clinging to her skin. Something deliberate had begun here, something that repeated down the decades like a dark prayer. She photocopied every page, the ancient machine groaning as if reluctant, and felt the first tug of obsession settle in her chest like a cold stone. Mara left the archives with a manila folder thick enough to feel like contraband, the photocopies inside still warm from the machine. The drive into the mountains took her through switchbacks that climbed like a slow heartbeat, the autumn leaves bleeding rust and gold against a sky the color of tarnished silver. She had booked a room at the only motel in Odd, a cinderblock relic with a flickering sign that promised color TV and hot water, though neither worked reliably. By late afternoon she was sipping bitter coffee in the Ridge Runner diner, the folder unopened beside her plate of pinto beans and cornbread, watching the locals watch her. They knew she wasn't from here the moment she walked in, city boots, notebook instead of a cigarette, questions in her eyes. Conversation dipped whenever she glanced up, then swelled again in murmurs too low to catch. Finally, old Mrs. McCoy, who poured coffee with the solemnity of a priest dispensing communion, leaned close enough for Mara to smell spearmint and wood smoke. "You the lady asking after the Whitakers up in Dead Man's Hollow?" she whispered. Mara nodded. Mrs. McCoy's hand trembled as she refilled the cup. "Best leave 'em be, honey. Folks round here don't speak their name after dark. They got ways up there ain't natural. Marry their own, keep the blood thick as sorghum. Children come out wrong, eyes too close, tongues too thick, some don't live long enough to cry." Across the booth, a trucker in a John Deere cap snorted but didn't contradict her. A teenage waitress hovered nearby, twisting her apron, until Mara caught her eye. "You ever seen them?" The girl glanced toward the door as if someone might burst in. "Once," she breathed. "Daddy hauls firewood. They come down the ridge sometimes, all together like a flock of crows. Same faces, over and over. Don't look at you direct, just kinda through you. One of the little ones waved at me. Had 6 fingers. She shuddered and fled to the kitchen. Outside, dusk pressed against the windows. Mara paid and stepped into air sharp enough to sting her lungs. A cluster of men on the bench by the hardware store fell silent as she passed. One spat tobacco juice that steamed on the cold pavement. "Ain't no map gonna get you there safe, miss," he called after her. "Road washes out deliberate like. They don't take kindly to prying." Mara offered a polite smile that felt brittle on her face and kept walking, the warnings settling between her shoulder blades like icy fingers. Every porch light seemed dimmer than it should, every dog chained in a yard barked itself hoarse at her passing. By the time she reached the motel, the folder felt heavier, as though the names inside had grown restless. She locked the door, drew the curtains against the staring mountains, and listened to the wind rattle the windowpane like something trying to be let in. Somewhere far up the hollow, a single light burned where no light belonged, steady and pale, waiting. The road ended where the map lied. Mara had followed a gravel trace that narrowed to twin ruts, then to nothing but churned mud and laurel hells so thick the jeep's roof scraped branches that clawed like living things. She parked at a rusted gate hanging from one hinge, a hand-painted sign dangling beneath it, "Whitaker, keep out." The letters looked freshly done, the red still wet enough to gleam. Beyond the gate, the land dropped into a narrow bowl ringed by pines so dark they drank the afternoon light. At its center crouched the house, 3 stories of blackened clapboard leaning together like drunks holding each other up. Smoke rose thin and straight from a chimney of fieldstone, carrying the scent of fatback and something sharper, metallic. Chickens scratched in the yard, silent, watchful. A single dog, lean, yellow-eyed, sat on the porch and did not bark. She was halfway across the yard when the door opened and he stepped out. Elias Whitaker was taller than the photograph suggested, stooped only by habit, not age. His beard spilled white over a collarless shirt the color of bone, and his eyes were the pale watery blue of creek ice. He carried no weapon, yet the dog lowered its head and whined. Behind him, 3 women appeared in the doorway, so alike they might have been the same woman reflected in broken mirrors, high cheekbones, thin mouths, hair the dull gold of broom sedge twisted into identical knots. They wore feed-sack dresses the shade of storm clouds, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms corded from work. Elias studied Mara the way a man studies a storm cloud deciding whether to break. Then he spoke, voice soft as creek gravel. "You lost, miss, or just stubborn?" The tallest sister, Mary, the census had called her, tilted her head. "She's the one been asking questions down in Odd," she said, not to Elias but to the air, as though reporting to something unseen. The second sister, Martha, smiled without warmth. The third, Lucinda, youngest by only 2 years, stared at Mara's hands as if counting fingers. Mara's throat felt lined with wool, but she lifted the folder like a passport. "I'm tracing family lines. Yours goes back farther than most. I thought you might could help fill in some blanks." Elias took one slow step down from the porch. The boards did not creak, they sighed, as though relieved to be walked on again. When he reached her, he smelled of wood smoke and lye soap and something older, like earth turned after a grave has settled. He did not take the folder. Instead he laid 2 fingers against the manila edge, gentle, almost tender. "Blanks get filled one way or another up here," he said. "Question is whose ink you want used." Behind him the sisters moved aside, making a space in the doorway just wide enough for one person to pass. The dog's tail thumped once, apologetic. Somewhere inside the house a child began to hum, tuneless and wet. Elias never blinked. "Well," he said, voice barely louder than the wind in the pines, "sun's dropping. Can't have you driving these roads after dark. Come set a spell." The kitchen was lit by a single kerosene lamp that swung on its chain whenever the house breathed. Shadows crawled across walls papered in faded cabbage roses, across shelves of mason jars filled with things that floated motionless in cloudy brine. Elias sat at the head of a table scarred by generations of knives, the three sisters moving around him in practiced silence, Mary ladling beans thick with salt pork into tin bowls, Martha slicing cornbread that steamed like fresh wounds, Lucinda pouring coffee black as creek silt. Children drifted in and out, barefoot, solemn, their faces soft and moon-round, eyes set a fraction too close, mouths small and delicate as bruised petals. No one spoke until every bowl was filled. Mara sat where Elias pointed, opposite him, the folder closed beside her plate like a sleeping animal. She felt the weight of every gaze, not hostile, but measuring, as though deciding which parts of her might be useful. Elias broke the silence the way another man might break bread. "You want to know why we keep to ourselves," he said, "not a question." He spooned beans, chewed slowly, swallowed. "World out there's poisoned water. Cities full of strangers breeding strangers. Blood gets thin, minds get weak. Our granddaddies learned different." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder, fingers bird-boned but steady. "We keep what God gave us pure," she said, voice soft as moth wings. "Ain't pride. It's duty." Martha leaned close to refill Mara's cup, close enough that Mara smelled the faint sweetness of her hair. "Outsiders mix with everything that walks," she whispered. "Their children come out wrong in the soul, not just the body. We chose different." Lucinda, youngest, lingered by the stove, rocking slightly. "The Bible says be fruitful and multiply," she murmured, eyes on the flame. "Don't say with who." Elias wiped his mouth with the back of a hand mapped by pale scars. "First time was accident," he said, almost conversational. "Two sisters loved the same man, war took all the others. They decided blood understood blood better than any stranger ever could. Kept the land, kept the name, kept the strength. Worked so well the next generation saw no reason to change." He gestured toward the children clustered in the doorway, 6, maybe 7, impossible to tell ages. "Look at 'em. Strong backs, clear sight. Some pay a price, sure. Lord takes his tithe any way he pleases. But the line holds." A boy no older than 10 stepped forward, lifted his chin so Mara could see the faint webbing between his fingers, the extra joint that let his thumb bend backward like a willow switch. He smiled, proud. "I can climb higher than any kid in the county," he said. "Tree don't mind an extra grip." Elias's pale eyes never left Mara's face. "We ain't monsters," he said quietly. "Just careful." The lamp burned low and the house settled around them like a beast curling to sleep, but sleep was impossible. After supper Elias had shown Mara to a narrow room under the eaves, a single iron bed, a washstand with a cracked mirror, a window that looked out on nothing but darkness thick as wool. She waited until the last footsteps faded down the hall, until the dog stopped pacing the porch, then slipped back downstairs with her flashlight dimmed to a pinhole. The parlor smelled of cedar and old grief. Moonlight leaked through torn curtains, silvering the spines of books no one here could read. On a shelf behind the rocking chair sat a small trunk bound in rusty tin. It was not locked, the hasp had rusted away years ago. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth yellowed to the color of old teeth, lay a diary no bigger than a hymn book, its leather cover soft as a baby's cheek. The first entry was dated March 12, 1866, the ink faded to rust. "Today I have sinned so deep the devil himself would blush. My brother Caleb kissed me behind the smokehouse and I kissed back though I knew it was death. War took every other man, left us alone with the corn and the guilt. Ma says better to burn in hell together than freeze apart." Page after page trembled in Mara's hands. The sister, Elvira Whitaker, wrote in frantic bursts between chores, how Caleb came to her bed when the winter wind screamed like judgment, how their first child arrived blue and silent, how the second lived but never spoke, how the family closed ranks and swore an oath that the land would never pass to outsiders, that blood would answer only to blood. Later entries grew calmer, almost serene, as the practice took root. Elvira described her own daughters marrying their uncles, her sons taking cousin brides, each union blessed in secret ceremonies under the new moon. She wrote of children born with the same pale eyes as their grandfather, of burying the ones who came too damaged in unmarked graves beneath the apple orchard so the tree bore sweeter fruit. The final pages were written in a shaking hand. If any stranger reads this, know we did not choose ruin. We chose survival. The mountains are jealous. They keep what they take. Pray for us, and pray harder for yourself, because once you know the taste of our sin you carry it too. A floorboard creaked behind her. Mara turned, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Only the diary lay open in her lap, its last line glowing like frost in the moonlight. The circle is perfect. Break it and we all bleed. Dawn came slow and reluctant, a bruised light that crawled through the pines and found the Whitaker house already awake. Mara stood at the kitchen window nursing coffee gone cold, watching the family move through morning chores with the eerie synchrony of marionettes worked by the same invisible strings. The sisters forked hay to a pair of sway-backed mules while Elias sharpened a scythe in long, singing strokes. Children carried slop buckets or fed the hogs, their footsteps oddly soft, as though the ground itself muffled them. Then the ritual began. Elias rang a handbell once, low and mournful. Everyone stopped where they were and turned toward the barn. Without a word they formed a loose circle in the dusty yard, men, women, children, even the yellow dog, all facing inward. Elias stepped to the center holding a tin cup filled with something dark. He lifted it to the sky, murmured words too soft for Mara to catch, then passed the cup sunwise. Each person drank in turn, the sisters with closed eyes, the children without flinching. When it reached a girl of perhaps 12 whose left arm ended in a soft knob below the elbow, she tilted the cup carefully with her good hand and swallowed like medicine. No one wiped the rim. The same mouth, the same blood, the same cup. Afterward they scattered again, resuming chores as if nothing had happened, but the air felt thicker, charged, the way it does before lightning. Mara's skin prickled. She saw now how faces overlapped, the same receding chin on a boy and the old man, the same wandering left eye shared by a woman and the toddler clinging to her skirt. Some defects were subtle, a tongue too large for the mouth, a spine that curved like a question mark, others blatant, an adolescent boy with ears set so low they brushed his shoulders, a little girl whose eyelids never quite closed, revealing wet pink beneath. At noon they ate on the porch, thick slices of salt ham, pickled ramps, cornbread crumbled into buttermilk. Conversation was sparse, delivered in a soft mountain drawl that flattened vowels until words felt slippery. A woman Mara had not yet learned to tell from her sisters asked Elias, "How's the new litter coming, husband?" And Elias answered, "Strong, like their mama and their auntie both," while stroking the hair of a child who could have belonged to any woman there. No one corrected him. No one needed to. Later, when the sun hung directly overhead and the heat pressed down like a hand, Mara watched two boys no older than 10 wrestle in the dirt. They moved with unnatural grace until one pinned the other and bit his shoulder hard enough to draw blood. The bitten boy laughed, a wet bubbling sound, and licked the wound clean. Their mother, or aunt, or both, looked on with quiet pride and said, "That's Whitaker stock. Don't waste a drop." Night again, deeper this time, the kind that pools in the hollows and rises until the house floats in it like a rotten boat. Mara had been given the same attic room, the same iron bed that sagged in the middle as though something heavy had lain there for years. She sat on the edge, boots still on, listening to the house breathe through its warped boards. Somewhere below, a clock that had no hands chimed once, slow and sour. A soft knock came at the door, 3 taps no louder than moth wings. She opened it a crack and found the girl from the circle, the one with the missing arm, standing in the hallway holding a candle stub. Up close Mara saw she was older than she'd thought, 16 maybe 17, her face caught between child and woman the way some fruit hangs half-ripe forever. A thin scar ran from her ear to the corner of her mouth, pale as milk. "You the one writing everything down?" the girl whispered. "Not a question." Mara nodded. The girl glanced down the dark stairwell, then slipped inside and shut the door with her shoulder. The candle trembled between them. "My name's Ruth," she said. "Ruth Mary Martha Whitaker. They use all three 'cause they can't never decide which mama I come from." She gave a small, bitter laugh that ended in a cough. "I want out. Before they match me." Mara's mouth went dry. "Match you?" Ruth lifted the candle so the light fell across her face, showing the faint webbing at her neck, the place where collarbones never quite met. "Next new moon. Uncle Eli says I'm ripe. Says it's my turn to keep the circle strong. Cousin Jacob's already asked twice." She shuddered. "Jacob's my brother and my uncle and my cousin all at once. He's sweet, but his fits come hard. Last time he bit his own tongue near in two." She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, pressed it into Mara's hand. "Map," she breathed. "Old mining road behind the ridge. Comes out near the river. I saved a little money from selling eggs. If you'll take me when you go." Downstairs a door slammed. Heavy footsteps started up the stairs, deliberate, unhurried. Ruth's eyes went wide and shining. "He knows when Samuel's heart turns," she whispered. "Please." The steps reached the landing. Elias's voice drifted up, soft as a lullaby and twice as deadly. "Ruthie. You up there, darling?" Ruth blew out the candle, plunged them into absolute black. Mara felt the girl's fingers find hers, cold, trembling, pressing the map so hard the paper cut. Then she was gone, the door easing open and shut without a sound, leaving only the smell of tallow and terror. The storm arrived without warning, a wall of black cloud that swallowed the ridge whole and hurled rain sideways against the house. Thunder cracked so close the lamp flame flattened, then sprang back taller. Elias had stood on the porch moments earlier, head tilted as if listening to instructions only he could hear, then quietly told Mara the jeep would have to wait till morning. "Mountain don't let go when it's riled," he said, and shut the door against the wind. Supper was eaten by candlelight because the generator refused to catch. The family crowded around the table like survivors of a shipwreck, faces flickering orange and hollow. No one spoke of the storm as anything but expected. When lightning strobed, Mara saw them all at once, 23 bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, eyes reflecting the flash in perfect unison, and felt the room tilt. After the dishes were done the children were sent to bed, but sleep was impossible. The house groaned and shifted, somewhere glass broke and no one went to see. Mara found herself in the parlor again, drawn by the same restlessness that had pulled her to the diary. Ruth did not appear. Instead the storm pressed closer, rain needling the tin roof like 1,000 small accusations. She was not alone for long. They came singly at first, a barefoot boy carrying a rag doll stitched from feed sacks, a woman whose belly swelled beneath her apron, an old man with no teeth who hummed through his nose, then in pairs, then all of them, drifting in from hallways and staircases until the room brimmed with pale faces. They arranged themselves in a loose ring around her rocking chair and simply watched, breathing together, slow and wet. Candlelight slid over skin that looked damp, as though they had all just risen from deep water. Lightning flashed again, and in that white instant Mara saw them clearly, the ones who had not come down to supper, the ones kept upstairs or in back rooms. A woman with a jaw that unhinged too far, a child whose scalp glistened hairless and ridged, an infant cradled in teenage arms whose eyes were only milky slits. They smiled at her with identical small teeth. When the darkness returned, their breathing did not stop, it grew louder, hungry. Someone began to sing, a low wordless drone that rose and fell with the thunder. Hands reached out, not threatening, almost gentle, touching her sleeve, her hair, the folder she still clutched like a shield. Cold fingers, every one. She smelled grave dirt and pennyroyal. The circle tightened. A voice that might have been Mary's, or Martha's, or both sighed against her ear. "Stay the night, honey. Storm's got teeth tonight." Outside the wind screamed around the eaves like something trying to tear the roof off and see what sins were hiding underneath. Inside, the family waited, patient as roots, for the mountain to decide whose guest she truly was. Lightning had split an oak up on the ridge, the smell of scorched sap drifted down through the storm like a warning. Power never came back, but around 3 in the morning the rain eased to a steady hiss against the tin. Mara crept downstairs again, barefoot this time, moving by the blue-white flicker that bled through cracked shutters. The house felt hollowed out, as though the storm had sucked half the life from it. She found the kitchen door unlatched, swinging just enough to let cold air lick across the floorboards. She meant only to breathe, to steady herself, but the yard pulled her. Mud sucked at her ankles. The barn stood open, its black mouth exhaling the warm stink of animals and something coppery underneath. Inside, a single lantern burned low on a nail. Elias was there, shirtless despite the cold, kneeling before a flat stone set into the dirt floor like an altar. His back was a map of old scars that caught the light in pale ridges. On the stone lay a sheet of tin, and on the tin someone had scratched a tree, not with a nail or knife, but with something sharper, something that left dark red-brown lines. Names branched outward in tightening spirals, Elias at the trunk, the three sisters twined around him like vines, then their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, every union marked with a small drop of fresh blood that still beaded, bright as garnets. The newest branch ended in a blank space waiting for ink, or worse. Elias did not turn, but his voice reached her soft and certain. Told you blanks get filled one way or another. He dipped 2 fingers into a bowl of thick crimson and drew a slow circle around the empty space. Mountain likes its tally kept honest, he said. Every outsider comes sniffing gets weighed. Some leave lighter. Some leave heavier. Some don't leave at all. Mara's foot struck something metal half buried in the straw. She looked down and saw a rusted license plate, West Virginia, 1987, the same year a graduate student named Ellison had vanished while researching folk medicine in these hills. Her own surname stared up at her from the dirt. Elias rose then, slow, joints popping like green wood in a fire. He held out the blood-slick fingers. Family's bigger than you think, Mara June. Always was. Your grandmama ran off at 16 carrying a Whittaker babe in her belly. Thought distance would thin the blood. Didn't work. Just made the call louder. He stepped closer, lantern light sliding across his face until the pale eyes looked lidless. Tree's got a branch with your name on it, girl. Been waiting patient. Storm's near done. Dawn'll show you the way home, if home still wants you. Or you can stay and finish what was started before you were born. Behind him the blood tree glistened, every name pulsing faintly, as though the tin itself had a heartbeat. Dawn crept in thin and grey, the colour of ash washed clean. The storm had spent itself sometime before first light, leaving only dripping eaves and a silence so complete Mara heard her own pulse in her ears. She stood in the barn doorway clutching the folder to her chest like armour, staring at the blood-scrawled tree that still glimmered wetly on the tin. Elias was gone, the lantern guttered low, throwing long shadows that moved when she did not. She should have run then. The jeep keys were in her pocket, the mud road would be treacherous but passable, and the mountain had loosened its grip. Instead her feet carried her back into the house, past the kitchen where the sisters already bent over the stove, past the parlor where children lay tangled in quilts like puppies, up the narrow stairs to the attic room she had never truly left. On the washstand, beneath the cracked mirror, someone had placed a small object wrapped in a square of faded calico. Her hands knew what it was before she unwrapped it, a photograph, edges scalloped, taken perhaps in the 1940s. A young woman stood on these same porch steps, one hand resting on a swollen belly, the other raised in a half-wave toward the camera. She wore a feedsack dress and a look of fierce determination. The face was younger, softer, but unmistakable, high cheekbones, wide mouth, eyes set just a fraction too close. Mara's own face stared back at her from 70 years ago. On the back, in pencil so light it might have been written yesterday. June Rose Whittaker, age 17, carrying first child. Left for Charleston 1943. Never came home. Blood remembers. Mara's knees buckled. She sat hard on the iron bed and felt the house settle around her, boards sighing like lungs filling after a long dive. Downstairs a bell rang once, breakfast, or summons, impossible to tell. Footsteps gathered in the hall, soft, patient, many. She heard Ruth's voice among them, thin and hopeful, then silenced by a murmur that might have been comfort or warning. The photograph trembled in her fingers. Every warning from the diner, every whisper in the archives, every chill that had followed her up the mountain clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. She was not the outsider here. She was the lost branch, the prodigal vein, the blank space waiting for its drop of blood. The door opened without a knock. Elias filled the frame, flanked by the three sisters, their faces calm and welcoming as women greeting a traveler long overdue. Behind them the children crowded the hallway, pale eyes shining with something that looked almost like joy. Ruth stood at the back, scar livid in the morning light, lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Elias extended one large, scarred hand. "Morning, daughter," he said gently. "Time to come home."